Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Alrighty, hello there folks, how you doing? Before we get to talking about Brendan, I just want to do one thing first. Charles Darwin, come on down, buddy. You had a question as to whether or not the state actually said they gave the family animal bones. Okay. I see the hair you're trying to split here, Charles. So let's just put the cards on the table. No, the state didn't actually use the words animal bones. Okay? No, they didn't actually use those words. They certainly danced around using any type of words like that. Certainly. Okay. We are now going to look at what they actually did say in response to Kathleen Zellner. Okay? We are now going to see what they actually did say. So, here we go. Right? This is from the documents filed by the state, and this is their own words. Okay, so here it is from the state's response to Zellner regarding the bones. And so here it goes. Under those circumstances, it cannot be said that the materials released from evidence would have been apparently exculpatory to anyone. Well, that's not true. If they're Teresa's, they would be exculpatory. That's why you guys wanted to avoid talking about them, and you would only spend 20 seconds talking about those bones because you were pretty desperate not to have them proven as Teresa's. So I disagree. If they were proved as Teresa's, they would be exculpatory, and you guys even know it because you wanted to avoid that pass, right? Anyway, there was no scientific evidence or record at the time that the material was released to support that human biological material was being released, or that the material was known to be the remains of the victim. So, you see that, Charles? You see what that just said right there? It said, there was no scientific evidence or record at the time the material was released to support that human biological material was being released. Okay, if you take human out of the equation, Charles, what's left? The fact of the matter is they believe these were Teresa Halbach's bones. Otherwise, why would they be giving them back? Charles, the problem with this, here is the conflicting nature of the statements. They don't wash, buddy. They only wanted to spend 20 seconds talking about those bones at trial because the best that could be said was they were a possible human. They did not want the jury to connect those bones to Teresa Halbach. And yet, there they go in 2011 handing these bones back to the Halbach family. And there it says, there is no scientific evidence or record at the time the material was released to support that human biological material was being released, or that material was known to be the remains of the victim. Why were they doing it then? Why? Why on earth would you be handing something back to the family when you're not even sure if it's human biological material? Why on earth would you do that, Charles? Okay, so yes, Charles, you got me. They didn't actually say animal bones, but you can see that right there, buddy. What's left? If it's not human biological material, what's left? All right. I think I've made my point. Okay, so there. That's that. If it's not human, then what else is going to be left besides animal remains? I mean, even humans are animals, but when you make the distinction that it's not human, it's going to be some other kind of animal biological remains. Anyway, okay. Okay, moving on from that. All right, we're here tonight to talk about Brendan. Obviously, it's, we all got the big kick in the teeth there on Friday. Governor Evers looks like he just basically gave a lip service kind of a response. kind of illustrating that he really didn't review it very much. That they basically determined that on criteria alone that it was denied. So it looks like they didn't even really look into it at all. So it's unfortunate, Evers was supposed to be, somebody for the kids and came from background in education, and it looks like he's really just another politician. Maybe he did care about those things at one point in his life, but then he started to become a politician, and probably that stuff went out the window. It's unfortunate that he didn't review Brendan's case, really, because he would have seen all the things that we see, and he would have been probably disturbed by all the things that disturb us about it. Some of the things they said, the two reasons they gave for denying were, one, because Brendan hadn't been out of prison for 5 years, which is a normal rule for the board, for the parole board. That's one of the rules they have to follow. And the second one was he hasn't registered as a sex offender. And it's like, are you kidding? I mean, if you had reviewed this case, you would have come to the same conclusion that most of us come to. Brendan has never had sex with Teresa or anybody else. It's pretty clear that he has not ever committed the act. Okay? And so stating that requirement about registering as a sex offender for somebody it's pretty clear has never even committed the act is bewildering, really. It basically shows that nobody took a look at Brendan's case, or there was some reason that nobody wanted to. Whatever it comes down to, it's pretty obvious that the reasons given didn't show a lot of depth as into actually looking into the case. So that's just my opinion. Anyway, all right. So when we talk about Brendan, first place we got to start with is why I feel Brendan just beyond in spades proves the impropriety of the state. In their eagerness to convict Stephen Avery. Okay? Because obviously most of these officers involved believe he was guilty. I don't believe they were all involved in planting, but I believe they all believed he was guilty. And for Wiegert and Fassbender, that meant they were willing to maybe push some boundaries. And so they were doing things like hounding Jody, hounding anybody they could, trying to get people to say, bad things about Stephen and, that sort of stuff, trying to get people to turn on Stephen. And it's interesting because the moment that Jody gets tired of them, basically badgering her, asking her awkward questions about her and Stephen's sex life that she didn't really want to be talking about them with, and you know what I mean, and all that stuff. And so she tells the jail, don't let them back in. I don't want to talk to them anymore. Right? So what happens then? Suddenly Wiegert and Fassbender set their sights on the Dassey boys. It's like, that's where they think, okay, that's where we're going. Everybody goes to Fox Hills for the weekend. It ends up they hone in on Brendan. Big shock there, huh? They honed in on the one that they felt was most malleable, that they could most easily bend to their will. Pretty obvious to me. And you see this clear progression. So it's like, why were they doing this though? Why were they hounding Jody? And then when she told them to go away, why were they then setting their sights on Brendan and feeding him this confession? Well, we got to go back and look at the evidence. And you guys have heard me talk about and cover this evidence. It's all very strange and fishy. A lot of it. There's many reasons, why all the pieces of evidence are fishy. Bones. Only 2/5 of them found in Stephen Avery's burn pit, and that's supposed to be the primary burn site. There is not a trace of Teresa Halbach anywhere in the garage or in the trailer. There is the magic bullet, which is sitting on top of the concrete dust after the jackhammering. There is, it just goes on and on where this evidence was going to be, questioned pretty strongly and vigorously by a good defense attorney. And so they were looking to hedge their bets. They wanted to try to do something big, and they did. Because when Fassbender and Uyghur fed that confession to Brendan and got him to spit it back at them, and that is what happened, because virtually every single fact came from them or the media, but a lot of it came from Uyghur and Fassbender in the way that they would ask their questions, in the little monologues that they would go into, sometimes before asking questions. And so they would feed a bunch of information, basically, giving Brendan an idea of what they were looking for to help Brendan, because Brendan was guessing. He told them he was guessing at one point. They don't care. He tells Barb that he was guessing, just like he does on his homework. It's obvious that Brendan was guessing, and they knew he was guessing. And they don't care. And this is why it shows the impropriety here. And what does this all lead to? Right? They coerce this, they feed this confession to Brendan, they get him to spit it back. They use that and hold the press conference. The huge press conference. Anybody 14 years old needs to step away or go out of the room or all that, and they give this gruesome press conference where basically nobody in the state of Wisconsin is ever going to have a clear mind. The jury pool at that point was just muddied beyond recognition. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, that press conference, they were desperate for that because they knew what was going to happen with the evidence in court, that a good lawyer was going to say, look, and point out all the problems with it. And the jury's not going to be stupid. They're going to understand why the defense is pointing out those problems. That's why it was important to color public opinion. And using Brendan's confession the way they did, colored public opinion, but then they didn't even have to use it at Stephen's trial. It had already done its job just by having a press conference about it. It had already been effective in what they wanted it for. Right? So that's why we see obvious impropriety with what went down with Brendan. Not to mention the fact that, yes, the confession was fed to him by the investigators. It was fed to him. You try to believe that BS that Judge Hamilton was trying to peddle over at the 7th Circuit Court, where he's trying to say, well, Brendan said they stabbed her and they raped her. You can't prove either of those things happened. There's no actual proof that any of that happened. In fact, there's no actual proof that Brendan was anywhere near this. There's no actual physical evidence that ties Brendan to a single piece of any of this that they claim happened. We just have investigators feeding him, facts so that he can spit them back and coercing a confession out of a 16-year-old with some learning disabilities. And a pretty shy kid, but also eager to please authority figures, which is what he was doing here. And it's a cocktail for disaster. But they didn't care because that's what they wanted. Fassbender with his I don't assess IQs. It's like, dude, you're an investigator. Part of your job is sizing people up in a moment. And you're going to tell me you didn't notice anything after spending all that time at Fox Hills with Brendan? That you had no inkling? You're an idiot, Tom Fassbender. You're an idiot. Oh, my God. Anyways. Okay, so we obviously have all the fact feeding that went on. They feed it to Brendan and everything. And, Brendan eventually, a lot of it, Brendan was guessing, multiple guesses. But it helped because of as the interview went on, they were feeding him more and more information, asking him less open-ended questions and more yes or no or multiple choice questions where you can convey a bunch of information in the asking of a question, right? And so they were doing a lot of that, and so they were giving Brendan the gist of what they were wanting in a lot of the questions that they were asking in the way that they were asking them, and that was what was going on. So the funny thing is that for a while, Tom Fassbender and Ken Kratz were running around and doing TV shows and trying to tell their side. You know, and when they did, Tom Fassbender cited the control question and why it was proof that Brendan's confession was true. Well, when he said that, I went, what? Really? So I went and found it. I went and found the control question. All right. It is not what he says. Nothing like what he says. Okay? He actually tempted fate, and he ended up getting a flip-flop from Brendan. Brendan ended up flip-flopping on his answer to the control question. So, to give a little bit of a background here, the control question is basically, well, to give you an idea of how they use a control question in a polygraph, right? They ask a question that, you know, or they ask a question, and they ask for a response that's not true, so that they can see how, you know, the needle works. And then they'll ask a question where the response will be true, so they can see how the needle goes, right? And it's basically a way of them calibrating and getting an idea for how the test is measuring, right? Well, in this situation, what Tom Fassbender was doing with the control question is they made up it's just a completely made up fact that they claimed Teresa had a tattoo on her stomach, on her belly, right? So they were making it up. It's completely made up. And the idea here was they were going to make up this fact and tell Brendan, and say, hey, Brendan, we know she had a tattoo on her stomach. You know, did you see that or whatever? Right? And the idea is that if Brendan, because it's a fake fact they made up, and they're trying to prove that it's almost like they asked the question because they wanted to try to disprove anybody that said that Brendan was malleable to them, right? So it's almost like that's why Tom Fassbender wanted to ask this question. So he asks it, and he tells Brendan, we know she had a tattoo on her stomach. Do you remember that? Well, here, let me go ahead and put the clip up for you, and then we'll come on back.
We know that Teresa had a tattoo on her stomach. Do you remember that?
Now, had Tom Fassbender stopped right there, his control question would have been a success. It would have been what he wanted it to be. Brendan guessed right. That's essentially what happened right there. But he doesn't stop there. Tom Fassbender goes one step further, and Brendan flip-flops. Here we go.
Do you disagree with me when I say that?
No, but I don't know what it was.
Okay, so you see what happened there in the second half of it, right? Basically, Tom Fassbender wanted Brendan to be disagreeing with him because it was a made-up fact, and if Brendan would have agreed with him, Brendan would have been agreeing that Teresa had a tattoo that she didn't actually have. That would have not have been good for Tom Fassbender. So he wanted Brendan to disagree. So when he asks Brendan right here, do you disagree with me? And Brendan immediately starts going, uh-oh, I don't want to disagree with him. And then he goes, no. He just flip-flopped. When Brendan says, no, I don't disagree with you, he's essentially saying, yes, Teresa had a tattoo on her stomach. That's what he's saying. And that's why the control question is an absolute failure. But Tom Fassbender went on TV and said otherwise. And it's always been a big pet peeve of mine because for him to go on TV representing this shite as proof of Brendan's guilt is ridiculous, right? So there's the control question. There's just all type of manner of things that when you look at Brendan's case, it's just not right. Len Kaczynski, Michael O'Kelly, and what they were doing. You know, I mean, how badly did this kid received no competent, representation virtually until trial. And, finally before trial, he got some lawyers that were decent. But, I mean, before that, he was just like a lamb to the slaughter. His own attorney, Len Kaczynski, was throwing him up, to the wolves. It's just disturbing, all the stuff that went on with Brendan, and that they don't see any problem with it, there in Wisconsin. It's just shocking. It's really disturbing. But honestly, I see things like this with other kids like Brendan, in other areas of the country. It seems to be something that cops do. When they can't figure out who actually did something, they will sometimes grab mentally, not on par with his, peers type of kid, and they will bully that kid and badger him into a confession. I've covered more than one case here. Devontae Sanford, just numerous, John Bunn, just a lot of them that I've covered here, where it does happen. Cops do seem to have that lazy attitude sometimes, where they wanna nail somebody for a crime, and so they will sometimes resort to some questionable methods to do it. And that's a lot of what happened right here with Brendan. I mean, when we look at it, he, we finished, Making a Murderer Part 1, and it was talking about how, his lawyers had just petitioned for writ of habeas corpus. And we found out a little bit later after that, well, not a little bit, but sometime after that, that Judge William Duffin had granted Brendan a writ of habeas corpus, and it was a 91-page decision, which was a long decision, typically. They don't usually end up that long. So Brendan, that was when it was announced, Brendan was, going to be released or whatever, and a lot of people heard in the media that Brendan was going to be released and that sort of thing, but that's not what happened. The state appealed, of course, and then so it went over to the 7th Circuit Court, went before a 3-judge panel. Brendan wins 2-1. Right. So Brendan's now won twice. His coerced confession is finally starting to be recognized for what it is, and being a coerced confession and all that. And then the state appeals again, but it doesn't appeal to the Supreme Court first. It appeals to the en banc for an en banc review, and gets it. It's rarer to get an en banc review than it is to get heard by SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. It's rarer to get an en banc review, yet the state got it. And what happened in that en banc review? But suddenly it swings against Brendan, and he loses 4-3. And AEDPA is all that anybody can talk about. Is all that the majority judges can talk about. AEDPA. AEDPA is a piece of legislation, folks, that robbed all of us of our habeas rights. And it has created a game in the justice system where the states know that they can pretty much get away with whatever they want now, because they know that the federal courts can't do dick about it. Yeah. AEDPA was a garbage piece of legislation. It needs to be amended. It needs to be, something needs to be done with it, because it did not just affect those it was meant to affect. It affected every single American. And that is unacceptable. But it's nobody's in a hurry to do anything about it, unfortunately. But AEDPA is the big reason. I mean, you got to look at it this way. Brendan's case is obviously a big deal, because even with the AEDPA, that vote was 4-3. It was that close. And it looks like the judge that stepped down right before this en banc review was convened, the judge there at the 7th Circuit that stepped down, most likely looks like he probably would have voted Brendan's way. And in a tie, Brendan would have won, because he had won 2 previous times. Yeah. It's just bizarre, how easy it is for the state to win. And how AEDPA has made it even easier. And how it's made it even harder for us as citizens to try to prove our innocence and get a fair shake outside of the little pond that we're that we started in, the state we started in, because they're obviously going to have an interest in keeping it all, wound up and wrapped up tight. They don't want it to pop out somewhere else where something else can happen and they can be called into, they can be called to account for it. They don't want that. And AEDPA now protects the states and stuff so that they can basically just do what they want and get away with what they want, because the federal courts can't do anything about it. There's nobody that can do anything about it. Or at least it takes it takes a great deal to get anything done about it. So, obviously, Brendan's a trooper, folks. He's out. He's in there. He's doing his thing. He's serving his time, and he's doing it admirably. And he's always got a smile in his pictures. He's a good kid. He's 30 years old, but I think his life's been put on hold, and in a lot of ways, he's kind of still a kid. But he is a good kid, and that much is obvious about Brendan. And when you know things like the fact that he faints at the sight of blood, that he just can't handle the sight of blood. Well, how could he have helped Stephen if that's what happened and they killed Teresa that night? How could he have been doing that? Because it could be kind of hard to do all those things if you're fainting constantly at the sight of blood, right? Cleaning up all that blood, right? Yeah. Anyway, it's ridiculous. So, obviously with Brendan, there's just a lot of things wrong with it. There's just a ton of things wrong with it. But I will say this, that when Laura Nyrider and Stephen Drizin eventually, appealed to SCOTUS, even though SCOTUS didn't take it, I gotta say the A briefs that were filed for Brendan, the amicus briefs, were freaking stellar. Those things were awesome. I mean, it's a shame that the Supreme Court denied the case and didn't even read those amicus briefs and stuff, because I think I found those amicus briefs to be very interesting, and I'm so glad that the entities that wrote them did. I just feel bad that they went to all that trouble to write those amicus briefs only for the Supreme Court to shine it on. Kind of a bummer. But the A briefs are awesome. I have covered them here on my channel. If you guys want to go check them out, you can just type in amicus briefs and they'll come up in a search on my channel. Interesting stuff. Really, truly interesting. And when you go to those videos, you'll find a link to the document down below if you want to read the entire documents as well. So obviously we're going to keep fighting for Brendan. We're going to keep the pressure on. We're going to keep the attention on. We're going to keep the spotlight on. And make sure that those agents there in Wisconsin know everybody's watching, and so you better not slip up, right? Because that's what's eventually going to happen, hopefully, folks, with all the pressure being exerted by the attorneys, the pressure of everybody watching, and all that sort of stuff. Eventually somebody's going to flip or slip, right? Flip or slip. All right. Okay, that's about it for this video tonight, folks. Brendan is obviously a huge problem, and what they did with Brendan is just, to me, proof in spades of their impropriety. That they could actually do that to a 16-year-old kid because they're so desperate for a conviction against Stephen Avery is just abominable. It's absolutely shameful, and the fact that they are continuing to back it and support it and all that is just ridiculous. With the whole world knowing what they've done, and they still continue to stick by it, and it's just shocking, truly shocking, but eventually it's gonna get set right, one way or another. Eventually it's gonna get set right, because they're just not going to be able to keep it under locked up like this forever. There's just too many people out there who have taken an interest, too many legal minds, too many people have come to the decision that they do not like the fact that interrogators are able to do like what they did with Brendan. And people are wanting to make that known. So one way or another, in time, it's going to happen. I'm confident of that. So hope you guys all enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.